topics yourself.
That's an idea. Thanks, Ian. Formal roll.
Right. Provost will now move to a roll call. Can the following members please indicate if they are present at the meeting? Councillor Affeld.
Present.
Provost Brennan.
Present.
Councillor Brooks.
Present.
Councillor Clockerty.
Present.
Councillor Crowther.
Present.
Councillor Curley.
Present.
Councillor Dorian.
Present.
Councillor Jackson.
Present.
Councillor MacLeod.
Present.
Councillor McCabe.
Present.
Councillor McCormick.
Present.
Councillor C. McElhenney.
Present.
Councillor J. McElhenney.
Present.
Councillor Maguire.
Present.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Present.
Councillor McVeigh.
Present.
Councillor Moran.
Present.
Councillor Nelson.
Present.
Councillor Quinn.
Present.
Councillor Rebecca.
Present.
Councillor Robertson.
Present.
Councillor Wilson. Are there any declarations of interest?
No.
Okay. No declarations of interest, and we know who's here. So please bear with me, ladies and gentlemen, because I've two statements to make. The first is that this meeting is being held remotely to comply with public health guidelines around social distancing. It will be filmed and recorded for live and subsequent broadcasts, which will be available through the Council's website. Our Council is a data controller under the GDPR and the Data Protection Act of 2018. We broadcast Council meetings to fulfil our public task obligation to enable members of the public to observe the democratic process. Data collected during the process will be retained in accordance with Council published policies, available through the Council website. All members of the Council are reminded that they should follow the Council's established meeting protocols, including around the use of the chat facility, and that comments made in the chat facility are visible to all participants in the meeting, which may include members of the public who have already received invites to the meeting. Thank you very much indeed. Now, a second statement. I've included this on the agenda as a matter of some urgency. This morning at 3 o'clock, 3 a.m. Eastern European Time, Russian forces invaded Ukraine. Ukraine is a sovereign, independent state. Over the last century, its citizens, through war, invasion, and famine, have died in their millions. In the light of the current invasion, I'm seeking for your support for me to write to the Russian ambassador calling for an immediate halt to Russian aggression against Ukraine. Do I have that support?
Agreed.
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 Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Provost, could I maybe just interject?
Yes, certainly.
I'm more than happy to associate myself with your remarks, and I think that clearly is unanimous agreement on part of the Council that you should send that letter. Can I also ask you to send a letter to Alex Salmond, leader of the ALBA party, requesting that he immediately withdraws from his contract with RT, the Russian state-backed propaganda television station? I think it's wholly inappropriate for him to continue to work with that organisation.
At this time, and only at this time, that seems a reasonable request. Now, if we go on to,
Provost,
sorry,
comment in the chat.
so,
I put a comment in the chat.
Jim, sorry, Jim.
Could I also ask that you include in that letter about Alex Salmond, about RT, you could also include that the BBC, ITV and other UK broadcasting channels stop selling their services and programmes to Russia as well.
Okay. Jim, I'm going to ask you, could you provide me out with the meeting with more information on that? Would that be possible?
Just a line, as I've said it, I'm quite happy to type up in the chat for you.
Would you be able to provide me more information about the sale of these programmes?
I don't know offhand, I just if there is any that are currently being broadcast or sold to Russia from the BBC, ITV and other UK-based stations, that they should stop selling these programmes and services to Russia. Likewise, the RT statement.
Are they actually selling programmes to Russia?
Well, if you put that in your letter, you'll get answered if they are or they're not. I'm sure they are. Whether it be old episodes of Coronation Street or whatever.
We don't seem to know that, Jim.
Well, you can ask for it to stop doing it if they're doing it.
But if they're not doing it, I can't ask them to stop doing it.
There's nothing to worry about then, surely.
It would damage the substance of the letter if I accused them of doing something they weren't doing.
BBC is broadcast all over the world, whether it be BBC World News Service. I'm sure that's broadcast in Russia as well. By definition, it's a world service.
No idea, Jim.
By definition, it's a world service.
Well, it's a British broadcasting service. I know that they broadcast abroad as well, but I'm not sure of the sale of programmes to Russia at the moment. Christopher.
Thanks, Provost. Can you hear me okay?
Sorry, Christopher.
Yeah.
Provost, I think Ian's tracking.
Associate
Take him in
myself.
first.
Well, with respect, the Provost dictates who comes into the meeting, and he's invited me into the meeting, so I'll continue.
Oh, sorry,
I would associate.
Yeah,
Okay, if we could maybe just stick to through the chat, it would help. I would associate myself with your comments, Provost, and I would endorse the letter that you wish to send on behalf of the council. I never quite who you wanted to think the Ukrainian embassy. I think that's absolutely
the Russian ambassador.
The right thing to do. I know that the Russian ambassador, that's absolutely fine. I know that you have had certainly, as I mentioned in the Telegraph last week, you've very much had a long anti-war record. One point I would make is that you're the civic leader of Inverclyde Council, and I think it's right that as a civic leader we accept your request or indeed mandate you, which in this we accept your request to write on behalf of the people of Inverclyde to promote a piece. I think it's unfortunate
Chris, you're
Councillor
breaking
McCabe
up.
wants to politicise the matter. It would be improper, in my view, for the Provost to write to the leader of a political party. It's the head of Inverclyde to, write to institutions, write to bodies, lobby on behalf of the people of Inverclyde. Councillor McCabe is the leader of the Labour group. Absolutely, in political parties. The fact that he wants to write to a political party leader in his role as a political party sadly does show that he wishes to make this a political issue, which I don't think it is, regardless of your views on the current situation, regardless of your views on RT, regardless of your views on Mr. Salmond. Surely everyone should agree that this is the time for diplomacy, cool heads, and civil conversation
Right.
With consensus. Well, sure about the Russian ambassador. I wholly endorse that. I would ask us to solely stick to that letter, and I would ask the council to ask Councillor McCabe to, send his own letters on matters of politics and let the council get on with the job of governing on behalf of the people of Inverclyde.
Right. I'm going to invite Ian and Mr. Strachan and then Innes. Right. Ian.
Thank you, Provost. Afternoon, councillors. Yes, I mean, I'm very conscious. I don't want to tread over my line. What I would say though is that the Provost, obviously, is the first citizen of Inverclyde. I would be, concerned about something that sort of statement that came out in the risk that we get into territory that is perhaps more for political motions and debates. And I suppose I just felt I had to come and say I was getting slightly uncomfortable with where that was going, and I felt the Provost was being put in an awkward position. So I just wanted to say that if I'm of course here to help support all the members in how we conduct matters today, but I just thought it might be helpful. Hopefully it is helpful if I just gave my thoughts around that.
Right. Okay, thanks very much. That's very helpful, Ian. What I'm going to propose is that I write a letter along the lines made in the statement. To gain consensus, I think that we may omit letters to Mr. Salmond. Innes.
It sounds like decisions already made, so I'll make no comment.
Stephen.
Just to say, Provost, I mean, you made a statement that you intended to send a letter to the Russian ambassador, and that's been endorsed. People are not approving whether you send a letter or not. You're intending to send a letter, and it's been endorsed. I'm simply asking you on a personal basis for you also to write to Mr. Salmond. Now, it's entirely up to you as to whether you send that letter or not. I'm not seeking for the council to mandate you, which the council can't mandate. You can mandate officers, can't mandate councillors. I'm simply asking you in a personal capacity to send that letter to Mr. Salmond. That's for your decision, and you can consider that at your leisure out with this meeting.
At my leisure out with this meeting, and offline I'll speak to you about that, Stephen, but to achieve consensus here, I think the thing is we send a letter, or I send a letter along the lines of my statement. Okay? With that, we'll proceed to item number 2. This is a single item agenda, being the approval of the 2022/23 budget, the 2022/25 capital programme, and approval of the Band D council tax for 2022/23. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask the Chief Financial Officer, Alan, to speak to his report.
Provost, could I briefly come in?
Yeah, sure.
It's just about the suspension of standing orders, Provost.
Yeah, right. Well, my understanding, it doesn't matter, Ian. My understanding was that that Alan would allude to the suspension of standing orders, and that we would do that then. But you're absolutely correct. The sooner we get this out of the way, the better. I'm going to ask the members here present to agree to the suspension of standing orders. Otherwise, we're not going to get very far. The reason being that paragraph 7.1 and 8.4 include the revisitation of decisions made in November and September in 2021. Do we agree the suspension of standing orders?
Agreed.
Right, okay. I'm now going to ask members to bear with me for a moment or two while I set out the conduct of the meeting. First, I'm going to ask the Interim Director of Corporate Governance, of Finance and Corporate Governance to speak to his report. Members who want clarification on that, on purely technical matters, will then have the opportunity to raise these issues with Alan. After any technical questions have been answered, I will ask the council leader to propose the budget motion and the deputy leader to second the proposals. Neither of them, neither the mover nor the seconder, is permitted to speak for more than 15 minutes. The ALBA party will then table an amendment. I would ask that they do that the following way. After the deputy leader has spoken. Again, neither the mover nor the seconder is permitted to speak for more than 10 minutes. After debate, the mover of the motion has a right to speak for up to 5 minutes. Can I also remind all members that no member other than the mover of the motion may speak more than once, except in those limited circumstances permitted by standing orders. I'd also advise members that I will be firm but fair and consistent, as always, with the limits on the length of speeches and contributions to debate. Alan.
Thank you very much, Provost, and good afternoon, everyone. The report before members today represents the culmination of many months of consideration and deliberation by the Members' Budget Working Group, plus decisions taken by the Council and the Policy and Resources Committee. The budget proposal in this report represents the consensus reached by 5 of the 6 groups within the Council. The budget bill was approved by the Scottish Parliament on the 10th of February, with a finance order due to be approved today. Earlier this week, a further £80 million of one-off funding to support economic recovery was announced in relation to 2021-22. However, the Council still awaits to hear details of the criteria for this spend and the amount allocated. Therefore, my advice is that this does not form part of the discussions today, and officers commit to bring reports back as soon as possible before elected members regarding this issue. As the Provost has alluded, there are already 2 proposals in relation to the approach to funding of the IJB and the reduction in the COVID capital allowance, which will require the suspension of standing orders to which members have already agreed. Finally, could I take this opportunity to thank elected members on the Members' Budget Working Group, trade union colleagues on the Joint Budget Group, our colleagues in the CMT for their input and challenge during the development of the budget. Specifically, can I also thank my finance managers and Craig Given, the Chief Financial Officer from the IJB, for their support and professional input during the process. As the Provost has indicated, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alan. Do we have questions of a technical nature?
Great.
Graham.
Thanks very much, Provost. Yes, as a clarification, Alan, Appendix 9, I don't think there's page numbers on my paperwork. Appendix 9 is the final proposal of the revenue budget. It opens up with a statement, first line, of the recurring funding gap as post-February Policy and Resources Committee, with a figure of 6014. If that figure was to be closed entirely with a council tax rise, I do realise you have it there, but I'm just not going to test my arithmetic. You're the professional. Could you advise committee, or council, sorry, what percentage of council tax rise, if the only way we had to close the gap would be to increase council tax? Thank you.
Council tax question, Alan.
Thank you, Provost. It would be about 18.5%.
Thank you very much, Provost.
Right, thanks. That was very concise. Alan's obviously got all the information at his fingertips and the arithmetic. I think it's Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you have a question for Alan?
I do, thank you, Provost. The decision that we're being asked to look at today in terms of the IJB is obviously the first time that we've taken this particular approach, and obviously we can't speak on behalf of the IJB. We don't know if they will accept the proposal that is being put forward to them in terms of a new financial arrangement. This is a process clarification. If everything went wrong in terms of that side of the house, what would happen at that point?
What would happen in the event of catastrophe?
Well, obviously there has been some engagement going on with colleagues, the IJB officers, and likewise between them and the IJB board members. So hopefully that eventuality wouldn't happen. But based on what has happened in other councils historically, there would need to be further discussions around this about what would happen to either the contribution or to the service delivery within that. And ultimately, from what I recall, the Scottish Government has some input into that process as well. But on the basis of the absolutely unprecedented sums that have been put into the IJB, I'm hoping that won't be something that the council has to worry about. Thank you.
We hope for the best. Okay. Elizabeth, are you happy with that?
Thanks, I hope so too. I join Alan in hoping that.
Natasha?
Thanks, Provost. My question was just around, do we have any indication as to when we'll hear about the 120 million share that we're getting? Just because I'm very aware, I think that we spoke about this a couple of times now, or heard about it a couple of times. Do we have any indication? And if we don't, can we write to the Scottish Government just asking for when that clarity will be given for us?
Alan, you heard Natasha. It's about 120 million pounds for Scottish councils.
Thank you, Provost. If it is the same 120 million one-off funding that was announced, I think at the end of January, I've included that at the bottom of Appendix 6 on the available reserves. The issue, I think that Councillor Maguire may be alluding to is whether it is going to be recurring, and that will probably not be known until later in the autumn when councils begin to get their 3-year figures because the indications are that the next spending review will cover a 3-year period for local government.
Thanks. Natasha, are you happy? Are you reassured?
I'm as happy as I can be about that. Thank you, Provost.
Tommy?
Yeah, thank you, Provost. Yeah, thank you, Provost. Just a couple of questions for Mr. Puckrin. Alan, we've got 2 proposals on the table today. Both include a significant use of reserves to support the revenue budget. Could you just confirm again what your advice would be in the maximum amount of reserves we would use for that?
Question on reserves.
Thank you, Provost. I've been clear for a number of months now. In fact, the use of potentially up to £4 million worth of reserves as part of this budget was actually agreed probably over a year ago by the council, and obviously was reviewed as part of the development of the budget, and certainly via reports to Policy and Resources, the council, and in my advice to the members' budget working group would be that I wouldn't want to go any higher than that because of the challenges, as you can see from Appendix 11 of the papers that you've got, that already exists for this council in terms of next year's budget. By that I mean 23-24's budget and 24-25's budget.
Thanks, Mr. Puckrin. Second question would be, one of the budgets today proposes to use £4.568 million from reserves. Given your vast experience as a Chief Financial Officer, if that budget was passed today, what would your advice be to members?
If elected members chose to increase the sum allocated from reserves, that would be a matter for them. They'd do it in the full knowledge that I've highlighted the real risks that the council faces already in terms of its use of reserves, and that would just exacerbate it.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Puckett. One final question. I noticed that the Alba budget doesn't appear to have an Appendix 11 on it, which is perhaps an oversight. But can you just confirm how their budget will affect the next 2 years vis-a-vis the budget deficit?
Alan, Tommy's asking you to speak on the Alba budget.
Yeah, certainly, and if that is an oversight, then it's my oversight. I apologise to members for that. I was just helping the party prepare a 1-year budget proposal. However, what it would do is, at the moment, when you look at Appendix 11 in the papers, the main papers that were issued, the funding gap is 13.4 million over the 2 years. It would add £500,000 onto that figure, so it would be £13.9 million.
Thanks, Alan. Are you happy now, Tommy? I mean, I don't mean happy. Is your question?
Yes,
right. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Provost.
Stephen, would you like?
Provost, I'm here.
Would you like to propose the budget?
Yeah. Thanks, Provost. That is my intention, obviously, to move the recommendations in the report, and Councillor Clockerty, as usual, is lined up to second me. And I have to say, we've tried to achieve consensus in this council over many years, and most years we have achieved consensus. And this year, obviously, 5 of the 6 groups on the council have signed up to the recommendations in the report, which is pleasing, unusual in the context of local government. We would hope that every group would have signed up, but given it's an election year, then that was always going to be a challenge, and so it's proven to be. Like Alan, I'd like to thank a number of people, the corporate management team, and obviously other officers who've worked very hard over the past year or so, developing the information we need to set the budget. It's obviously been another difficult year for everybody, so it's appreciated all the effort that people have put in. And again, a thanks particularly to Alan and his team in finance for all the support that they've given to us. Our colleagues in the trade unions, who worked again well with management through the joint budget group, and indeed have engaged with the political groups, albeit virtually. And we obviously carried out a consultation with the public, so thank you to all the members of the public who've responded. This is an unusual year for us, Provost, because we're actually setting the budget and the council tax in the same day, and it's the first time we've done that since 2017, I think. So it's 5 years since we've been in this position. And I think it's a positive thing, because it does reflect the fact that the SNP government have now decided, at least for this year, to allow councils to make their own decisions on the level of council tax, albeit there's been heavy hints about keeping the increases at or below the rate of inflation. I know the Alba party have obviously taken a different stance politically. Their party leader has called in all councils to freeze the council tax, and called in the Scottish Government to essentially impose a freeze in the council tax. And he is the original architect of the council tax freeze, so it's to be expected, I suppose. But in reflecting on the settlement, it's again been a very poor settlement for local government, and that was reflected in the response from council leaders across Scotland, who on a unanimous basis, arguably for the first time, came out very critical of the government settlement. It did lead to some minor movement, but overall it's been a poor settlement. So looking at the funding on a recurring basis, COSLA has estimated that there's been a £371 million cut in local government funding in real terms. And for us, we've got a share of that of around £5.5 million. So obviously, if we had an extra £5.5 million, then our job of balancing the budget would have been immeasurably easier. And I think we need to understand, Provost, that this is not a one-off. We've been facing cuts in our funding for many years. So since 2008, which was coincidentally the first year an SNP government set its budget, and the first year I moved a budget as council leader, Inverclyde Council has approved savings of the order of £63 million. That's an average of 4.2 million a year. And to put that into context, Provost, if you look at the budget report before us today, that's more than double the budget of the Environment, Regeneration and Resources Directorate. So think of the damage that has done to the council over the past 15 years. And even within the life of this council over the last 5 years, we've made savings totalling £15.5 million. That's an average of £3.1 million a year. Now, that's less than the savings we've made previously, but the reason for that is we've obviously, in the context of COVID over the last couple of years, looked at using a significant amount of reserves to balance the budget. But as has been highlighted in earlier contributions, the day of reckoning will come. And if we look at the challenge ahead on the basis of the funding proposals in the report, then next year, 22-23, we're going to face a 6.6 million funding gap, unless obviously we see some change from the Scottish Government in their approach. So turning, Provost, to the specific proposals in the paper today. So the 5 political groups are proposing to close the remaining budget gap of £6 million through use of reserves of £4 million, savings and budgets adjustments totaling just under 1.4 million, and a below inflation council tax increase of 1.95%, which would raise just over £620,000. Council tax really doesn't raise a lot of money these days because of the long-term caps and freezes on council tax. And I think these proposals probably strike a balance between cuts to services and jobs, increases in charges for service, and indeed a rise in the council tax. But I think we have to again reflect the fact that if we didn't use £4 million worth of reserves, as Tommy has pointed out earlier, as Alan's pointed out, we could have faced a council tax increase of 18.5% or significantly more cuts in services and jobs and rises in charges. Obviously, the budget proposals have £2 million to be set aside for next year to assist in the challenge that the new council is facing, but I think we shouldn't underestimate that challenge. And we also have to recognise, Provost, that we are still in a recovery phase from COVID, and we see it certainly as last year didn't want to make significant cuts to services specifically because of that. And we also have to be conscious of the fact that we do have a cost of living crisis, which again is reflected in the proposals before us today. So there's been a lot of debate over council tax, and I'm sure we're going to have further debate in this meeting over council tax. But the proposed increase of 1.95% will be at the lower end of increases across Scotland. Today, I think there's, before today, 9 councils have declared a council tax. Sorry, more than 9 actually. 9 have applied a 3% increase, 2 have gone for 2.5%, 1 for 2.38%, and 1 council, that's Shetland Island Council, which has one of the lowest council taxes in Scotland, probably due to the oil revenue that they get, has gone for a council tax freeze. So most councils are round about 3% at this point in time. And we know, Provost, that although some council tax residents will face an increase in their charge, 32,000, that's 81% of our households, will actually pay less in council tax in the coming year than they did in the current year, and that's due to the £150 rebate from the Scottish Government. And for those in the higher banded properties, which does include myself, who don't qualify for the rebate, weekly increases will range from 66p to £1.22. In addition, for the 10,000 households that are either exempt from council tax reduction, exempt from council tax or receive council tax reduction, they won't be affected by the council tax increase, and indeed they will receive a £300 one-off payment from the council, costing £3 million, and they'll also, most of them, qualify for the Scottish Government's £150 rebate, which means in total they'll receive support of the order of £450 towards their fuel bills and other household essentials. So between those 2 measures, we're going to see £8 million of financial support to households in Inverclyde in the coming few weeks. Turning to capital, Provost, despite the ongoing cuts to our capital programme, our capital funding from the Scottish Government, we will have a significant 3-year capital programme with total investment of around £62 million planned. That will include investment in ICT, including in our schools. roads and environmental works of 18.2 million, regeneration of our town centres 5.6 million, our scheme of assistance and aids and adaptations 2.6 million, Clun Park 1.3 million, our property assets 8.9 million, community facilities 3.4 million, schools and early learning centres 10.3 million, and social work facilities 8.3 million, and that includes 7.1 million for our new learning and disability hub for adults. And I think it's worth noting, Provost, that when you look at the education capital programme in the papers, we don't actually have any new major projects in the next 3 years. And that's because we have completed the renewal of our school and early learning estates. And I think that's something, a milestone that we can all celebrate. But Provost, ever the prophet of doom, the fact is that the continuing cuts to our funding and capital from the Scottish Government will mean that in future years we're going to face an ongoing challenge of maintaining our assets, never mind invest in new ones. So getting to the recommendations, Provost, I will formally move the recommendations in the report. And with regard to the council tax, I'll specifically move in terms of paragraph 3.5 that the council resolves to set the Band D council tax for Inverclyde for 22-23 at £1,357.81, and I would invite Councillor Clougherty to second my motion.
Thank you, Stephen. You're within the allotted time and fairly comprehensive coverage. Jim.
Thanks, Provost, and thanks, Stephen. You'll be glad to know that I will not be taking up the full allotted time. What I would like to say, Stephen highlighted that the road ahead for local government is not going to be an easy one. In fact, it's going to be very difficult over the next 5 years, probably. We have used £4 million of our reserves in order to ensure that we don't have the more severe cuts that could have been inflicted on our community. However, in doing that, we've also set aside £2 million for next year on the reserve side as well. So whoever the next council leader is going to be, they'll not be getting a wee note saying there's no money left, because we have tried ourselves to understand how difficult it's going to be in the coming years. What I would say as well, Stephen highlighted some of the capital programme. I, of course, personally are delighted the town centre and the work going to be commencing on West Blackhall Street, as well know it as the regional shopping centre of Inverclyde. And I'm looking forward to seeing that work progressing over the next couple of years. But as he did highlight, we have not set out any money for any major school, because we've done it. In the last 15 years, we spent £270 million in refreshing, building new schools within Inverclyde, making our schools some of the best schools and Pre-5 establishments in Scotland. And I do think that's something over the last 15 years that, especially us in the Labour group, but all political parties can actually take a wee bit of credit for as well. So once we get Gourock Primary over the line, which I'm sure will happen hopefully before the end of this council term, every school in Inverclyde could be looked upon as something proud to go to. What I would say as well is we'll all be watching our television sets tonight, and we'll be looking at the pictures coming out of Ukraine, and we'll be looking at the ramifications of the tragedy that's happening in that country, and the ramifications of that will actually be felt here in Inverclyde. We've already highlighted that we're going through a cost of living crisis and an energy crisis, and that is only going to be exacerbated over the next year. And I think the measures we've put in place in this budget to try and help alleviate some of that has got to be commended by everyone. So I am happy again to formally second Stephen's budget, and I hope that we have a constructive debate, and I hope that as many members as possible can join it. And since we have mainly came to a unified position of at least 20 of the councillors. So thank you, Provost.
Thanks very much, Jim. Now, before the general discussion, We have a motion from Alba, and I think, Christopher, you're going to propose the amendment. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, Provost, thank you. Yes, thanks very much, Provost, for inviting me to speak. I would associate myself with the comments already made in regards to the support from our council officials and Mr Puckman's team in the CMT and all other officials and officers that report to them. And I would ask also that my thanks be passed on to them for their very hard work in setting, which is an important exercise, but obviously in the context of the COVID outbreak of the last 12 months, I certainly know that it has been difficult for certainly not just everyone, but our officials and officers in terms of their time commitment. So I thank them and our trade union colleagues for the constructive manner in which they've engaged in the process. I think, Provost, that the reality is politics is a matter of priorities. Our party, Alba, certainly sought to work constructively across the party spectrum over the past 12 months, or probably the last 9 months, I think would be maybe more accurate. And I think that Councillor McElhinney Senior certainly did value being part of the members' working budget group, and there was indeed a lot of. I mean, today's two budgets have large sections of our capital programme, the projects that will be taking part in each year through our education services and in the community are largely similar, because consensus was achieved at numerous junctures and then approved through our committees over the course of the year. So consensus was achieved on many occasions, and I think which is right and fit and proper in a democracy is that when you do come to disagreements in politics, we should welcome that. That's just a perfectly legitimate part of the political process. People elected with different viewpoints and ideologies and worldviews naturally will come to different points of view. And of course, we were clear as the moment was coming to the denouement of this year's budget that a council tax freeze was one of the priorities that we wanted to achieve out of this year's budget. And it's absolutely fine that other members of this council thought that the increase they're proposing for the separate priorities that can then allow them to enact is perfectly within their right. But our position was that in light of the cost of living crisis, the council tax should be frozen across the board. Another one of our priorities, of course, was to secure £500 of payment to 10,000 households across Inverclyde. And we've managed to do that through the combination of support for the Scottish Government and prioritising our own more resources. And of course, I welcome the fact that the budget that's previously been moved has made a substantial movement from the initial allocation to the current allocation, which would be £450. So regardless of the political priorities approved today, you know, that's more support, regardless of the political banner or none that any member of this council is under, more support to households in need in Inverclyde than I'm aware of in any other local authority in Scotland. And I think that money will make a really valuable, really meaningful impact to people, because it's real collateral, real capital in their pocket at a time of need. And some people, of course, say to me that they don't agree with that because, you know, they think it should be services that we should buy for people because we'd have no control over the spend of the money. But I reject that. I think that people should have the choice, like I and others here do, to spend income as we see fit. And of course, that's extra money, of course, into Inverclyde's local economy at a time that it's most likely that, you know, the cost of living crisis exacerbation that Councillor Clotterty mentioned will only become tough, because I think the price of unleaded petrol set to hit about £1.55 next week. You know, that's, you know, more and more money out of people's pockets. So I think it's great that we're putting money into the pockets of tens of thousands of households in Inverclyde. And I think that everyone across the council, you know, should be proud that they've made that decision, albeit there's certainly a difference in the level of funding, albeit £50, but nonetheless, it's a priority, and I hope that in years to come, we can accept that this is the sort of funding stream that we need to try and year by year find a revenue fund so that we can make this more permanent. In terms of the wider budget, Provost, you talk to more people than I, of course, in Inverclyde, being more popular than me. But there is a feedback that the previous social contract has broken down, and I know people will say, well, only houses in the highest bands would get a council tax increase, but those people, aren't all living in wealth. Many of them, particularly older people, or their families have moved on, and they're feeling the pinch as well, albeit the capital that they hold through their property on paper would class them as richer people, but their disposable income, like many other people's, isn't. And I think that many of those people who have contributed to their corporation say duty, their community charge, their council tax over 40-50 years, I think it's right that they see that they get something from their council tax. I think that particularly when you get elected as a new councillor, it's an eye-opener that you actually have responsibility for thousands of services. But that sadly doesn't translate to the public. Many people see the council empties bins, fixes roads if they can, and operates schools, and after that many people don't actually have lived experience of council services until they need the service. So I think it's right that we have policies that people see they're getting value for their money. And I think a mistake that the council did make a few years ago was scrapping the funding for over 60s free swimming. So I'm pleased to put that back on the agenda today, because I think that as we recover from COVID, we've absolutely learned that I think probably everyone in the meeting has a family member or a friend that died tragically, and there was always a common factor in many cases of the link between severe disease and not as good a health outcome as one would hopefully have had. So I think that not only is this a reward for our elderly citizens, I think it's also a very good public health initiative to encourage more people to get active. And if you look at the decision we previously made on under the young people's in schools, if there's energy there, they shouldn't. We made a mistake to separate them in the past, and I hope that next year we look at all these things in the whole and start to establish policies that have outcomes or meaningful outcomes to lift people out of poverty, make our population fitter, make them healthier. And I think that is certainly something that we aimed to do in our budget. So Councillor Jim McElhaney will second the amendment. I would, in terms of the recommendations, I would move as is set out in the papers, with the exception that in terms of the Band E council tax rate, that it's frozen at the rate it was in 2021-2022 for 22-23. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Christopher. A very reasoned contribution. That was news for me, that I'm more popular than you. So, but that's what I'm going to wear on my T-shirt during the summer. I am more popular than Christopher McElhaney. I think that's my logo. I think Jim, you wish to speak.
Thanks, Provost. I think at times you're more popular than me, the Councillor Christopher McElhaney, but we'll not go there. Provost, it's a political choice for councillors to raise the council tax, which in this unprecedented predicament where households are facing energy costs going through the roof, it's one that doesn't need to be made. I'm proud that Alba Party are addressing these issues here and now with a balanced alternative budget that helps those most in need. Councillor McCabe said that COSLA were unhappy with the initial settlement. He didn't allude to the fact that COSLA asked for an additional £100 million, and the Scottish Government answered by adding an additional £120 million, yet he's still not happy. Councillor McCabe states that the proposed council tax rise will only affect those in the higher bands and range from an extra 66 pence to £1.22 a week, £35 to £60 a year. It's not just the well-off who live in higher banded houses. Poverty is across the board and of all ages. £30 to £60 could be the difference of whether a child gets a new school uniform or a new warm winter coat. It could mean a family visit to a supermarket instead of a food bank one week. These are unprecedented times. our community are under severe pressure, still suffering the ravages of COVID, with cases still high, and things are not going to improve for a lot of people. Financial anxiety will be caused by energy costs about to rise dramatically. You can see food prices on the rise as we do our weekly shopping. Our social landlords are increasing the rents in their communities against a backdrop of a private housing rental market where rents are out of reach for a lot of people who can't afford to buy their own home. Scottish water charges are going up by 4.2%. There is no doubt that families will struggle. I want to draw members' attention to those who are termed to be in work poverty. How horrendous is that? Which leaves people who are working struggling, costs of living rising, and one of the highest levels of fuel poverty in Scotland. I want to emphasise the situation for those who just miss out on benefits because they're in work, are lowest paid. The impact of them will be harsh and unrelenting. We have money. We have it in reserves, mostly put aside for a rainy day. Well, I have news for you, Provost. There's a tsunami about to hit us. But I remind you again of our lowest paid. They may well have no contingencies, no reserves. Banks will not lend to them, and they all too often fall prey to loan sharks or payday loans to cover essential costs and get deeper and deeper into despair. Looking at our local outcome improvement plan, priority 2, inequalities. There will be low levels of poverty and deprivation, and the gap between the richest and poorest members of our communities will be reduced. The Loic 10-year vision, there will be a reduction in the number of Inverclyde residents experiencing problems with debt. The number of Inverclyde residents living in fuel poverty will be reduced. There will be a reduction in the number of children living in poverty. There will be a reduction in the attainment gap with an increase in the attainment of pupils living in the 20% most deprived areas in Inverclyde. The life expectancy of males and females living in the 20% most deprived areas in Inverclyde will increase. A reduction in social isolation and loneliness amongst older people will result in improved physical health. Our officers and staff work tirelessly to address these. Only our budget aspires to meet these objectives. Anything else means that our Loip is just meaningless platitudes, and all the good work will have been in vain. What we wish to do is ask for your support and to give our communities a small bit of breathing space. What it will be like when costs increase, mortgages and rents increase, food prices increase, taxes increase, and you're struggling to make ends meet, battered and bruised by the system. Picture that. Put yourself in their shoes, let down by those who they put their trust in. That's us. We are trusted to do everything in our power to improve their lives and their predicament. Let us freeze the council tax and show our communities that we understand, that we care about them when many of them are facing these harsh realities and hardships. Of course, we would like to make this sort of intervention every year, but that isn't sustainable. It is therefore for the leader of the new council through COSLA to lobby hard for a fairer settlement for local government, for long-term sustainability at the resources spending review. It's a political choice to put aside a further £200,000 to bail out an already spiralling out of control £1.8 million indoor tennis facility. A facility that, in the context of what I'm saying, is just sheer luxury. Is it a political choice to allocate an additional £500,000 on top of the £0.56 million already set aside for replacement of a replica of the Comet? Again, talking about using £1 million when we know families and households are desperate and in despair. Desperate to put food on their tables, to heat their damp houses and put clothes on their children's backs. It's a political choice for you to shun these vulnerable members of our community. People could die from cold or starvation, heat or eat. At the last meeting of the Member Budget Working Group, there was a particular group who were not united in the council tax. Councillor Wilson has publicly gone on record saying that he supported a council tax freeze. The leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats is asking for a freeze. Many SNP council groups support a freeze. We all got into the politics because we thought we could make a difference. I'm asking you now, please support the amendment. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. I have a number of people who wish to contribute to the discussion. But first of all, I'm going to invite Councillor MacLeod. Jim, are you there? Jim? No.
Provost, I would.
Yeah.
I think there should be a certain order here. I would prefer to give the opportunity to our respective group leaders to have their say first, and then by all means I would welcome being invited to comment afterwards. Thank you.
I did this, Jim, because I'm very conscious that I didn't invite you in at a prior meeting, and I wanted to remedy that. But if you wish to speak last, so be it.
I think on this occasion, Provost, because that's the normal format when we're in a chamber when it's been for the budget. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. I stand corrected. I sit corrected. Elizabeth.
Provost, thank you. Just a statement from me, if that's okay. A few things that I want to say this afternoon to add to the debate, and to speak on behalf of the motion, and a little about this budget, but also about the context of budget setting. One of the key principles that I've learned about our budget setting task is the importance of seeking balance that truly gets to the heart of our job here for the people of Inverclyde and makes decisions that are based on their practical realities rather than our political differences. We absolutely need a more balanced relationship with Scottish Government as we carry out this task. Does the settlement to local government need to change? Absolutely, I believe it does. And I agree with COSLA President, Councillor Alison Emerson, who noted this afternoon at the COSLA conference that there does need to be an acceleration of agreed work to renew the fiscal framework, which determines that financial relationship. And I hope to see evidence of positive change in the government's imminent spending review. But also, has Scottish Government provided considerable additional funding, and in fact continues to provide additional funding almost as we speak for COVID to help with the cost of living pressures, to support key strategic priorities? Yes, they've done that too. And I'll say what I've said before, I'm never going to allow myself to get into a position where I say that extra funding coming to Inverclyde is a bad thing. We can ensure impact with whatever resources come from whatever sources. Provost, we also, in carrying out our budget setting responsibilities, have a duty to keep one eye firmly on the here and now with another looking ahead. That balance is vital if we're to do what's right by the people of Inverclyde. So there are two budgets set before us this afternoon, and I would urge us all to consider them through that particular lens and ask these questions. With the provisions within the budget, are we substantially supporting people who are struggling and who need us to be there for them at a very difficult time? But also, is there provision within each of the budgets to ensure that in the years to come, we've maintained the foundation of good governance and financial cushion for any continuation of difficult times ahead? Balancing answers to those questions is key in fulfilling the role that we all have here. Help now, but also help always. Direct provision to support vulnerable households and continuing high quality services that people need. And we've really got to ensure the balance of both. Provost, in this election year, it would be really easy to have 6 budgets presented today with each grouping forging their own path. I'm sure that option was considered by other groups as it was by our SNP group. But the Members' Budget Working Group system is something I'm really proud to be part of. It makes real and practical the point that I often make, that in local government there's much that we agree on. We just need to find respectful ways of dealing with the things that we disagree on. It's appropriate for the times that we live in that broad consensus has been reached on this budget. We are still in recovery. I do thank our officers and our group members for the work across the budget cycles that we've had over the years that have gone into preparing papers, providing us with evidence from which we can make recommendations and presenting choices across the variables that make up our budget to help us reach an informed balance. Within this proposed budget, that's the motion today, my own group have engaged the support of others to secure £150,000 worth of investment to help kickstart a refreshed outward look for opportunities for Inverclyde. This is a really modest investment, but I really believe it's going to yield much for us over time. Our group have also asked you all to work with us over a number of years now on a process regarding school swimming, where we would get better information on how this money works and in fact changing how the money is even issued, so that we can consider this investment as in an evidence-based way to best support our children, not just as an election promise or a knee-jerk reaction. So again, thank you for working with us to see that this change is seen through properly. Our group also suggested that council tax be around 2%, and the proposed level within the budget that is the motion today is 1.95%. We're pleased that others were able to meet us here. Council tax at this level also plays a part in achieving that balance that has been threaded through everything that I've said this afternoon, laying a foundation for future funding, knowing that the people who can least afford to contribute are still supported with not only money from Scottish Government but also from us as a council, and additionally from the established system of council tax reduction and exemption. Provost, we support the budget that is put forward as the motion today, because in shaping it and helping to shape it, we've worked hard to get the balance right for the people of Inverclyde, and thank you for hearing my comments on this particular item.
Well, thanks very much, Elizabeth. Thank you. Ronnie, Councillor Alfield has a point to make. Ronnie.
Thanks very much, Provost. I think before commenting on any of the budget proposals this afternoon, I would like to associate myself with your comments and those of others relating to Ukraine. Our thoughts and prayers, I'm sure, are with all of the people there in this terrible assault on democracy and freedom. Provost, the first thing I would like to say this afternoon is to thank Alan Puckrin and his finance team for their assistance and responsiveness. We are really fortunate to have such outstanding professionals supporting us. And Alan, please convey our thanks to your team for all their support, and of course to the CMT. In terms of this budget, Provost, I don't intend to say very much about it, but perhaps some specifics that I am we are particularly happy with. I would commend the continuing support for regeneration forums. This support has allowed us to engage with a whole cross-section of our local communities. And we are fortunate in Europe to have so many committed members from local traders, local people, representatives of local organisations and others, all fully committed to making improvements in our town and suggesting and initiating new projects. It's vital that we continue to support these community groups, and I'm pleased that their importance has been recognised as we formulated today's budget. And for me, Provost, a red line all the time in negotiations will always be any reductions in our library services. I'm pleased that our brilliant facility in Europe will continue providing outstanding services to our residents. Provost, negotiations regarding today's budget announcements have been protracted and at times complicated. And I know that I'm not breaking or disclosing any confidences when I say that at times the debates between the four independents have been more animated than those at cross-party level. However, we believe that compromise was the best option, and that is what we agreed on as being the only way forward. I would commend this proposal today, Provost. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Roy. Thank you. Thanks again. Jim, are you prepared to speak?
Yes, Provost. Yes. Thank you. I just thought it was the right thing. I mean, thank you for offering to bring me in earlier, but I just thought it was the right thing on this occasion, certainly to give each of the group leaders the opportunity to speak first. First of all, Provost, can I just say that I fully support your sentiments and comments about Russia and the aggression by President Putin towards the Ukrainian people. And I would fully support a letter being sent to the Russian ambassador. I think all our hearts go out to Ukraine and its people today. It must be absolutely horrific particularly for young children. God knows how they must feel with bombs raining down on our country today. Shocking. Provost, can I say also that I fully support what others have said as well, and I thank Alan Puckering and his team, and indeed all the staff in helping to take the budget proposals forward and for all their assistance. I agree with my colleague, Councillor Robertson, that it's good that at least 5 of the groups, which is the majority, have been able to reach consensus here. I remember years ago when I first got elected, that's 15 years now, but many of those years we all did our own, prepared our own budget, and very often, you know, we came away from the table. You know, it was a case of sometimes the greater numbers or the bigger size of the group carried through their proposals, and we felt that there were certain things that we would have liked to get passed that we weren't able to get passed. So I think this way of working, I think it does bring consensus. I think, you know, there will be things that we agree and other things that we disagree on, but I think it's certainly a better way of working, and that we can try and reach consensus, which is going to help all our communities and, you know, the majority of our constituents. You know, sadly, there are certain things that decisions we've had to take. There are savings that have had to be made, and some of them are not going to be popular. And it's really sad that we have to do that. But there is only a finite amount of money. We have to balance our budget each year. Councillor McCabe talks about the Scottish Government not giving us enough money. But very rarely does he talk about the money that comes from London, or should I say the money that doesn't always come from London and from Westminster. And that is the crux of it, that London, Westminster, holds the purse strings. And as long as that continues, and Scotland has very few borrowing powers, then that's how it's going to continue. There is only so much money, and it can only go so far. And that's what makes it all the more difficult. But certainly, I think that the way I praise the members' budget working group and the councillors who are involved in it, because I know it's been a long process, but they've all worked hard, they've all worked together to try and reach the best outcomes for our constituents and for our communities. And yes, I take on board what Alpha have said about the council taxes. We know the council tax has been frozen in Scotland for many years with support from the Scottish Government, but this year it has been left to councils to determine their own council tax. But as what's been said by others, many people will not be affected by council tax rise, and for those who will be affected by it, it will be very little. It will be maybe £30 to £50 or £60 a year, and you know that's what's there. But I would like to just finish off by saying I commend the group of councillors who came together and put this budget proposal forward. I'd like to commend it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. Thanks for underlining the effectiveness of the MBWG. I have another question from Natasha.
Thanks, Provost. It's more a comment than a question. So this is my 5th budget, and each year it's gotten harder and harder to look at our financials and how much we have to cut whilst trying to provide for the citizens and staff of Inverclyde. We need to have stability, and we have not had that throughout our term here. Our settlements have consistently reduced in real terms, with Councillor McCabe pointing out that 15.5 million in our term and 16 million across the past 15 years. These are unthinkable numbers, and our council services and our constituents are now living with decisions that we've had to make because of the decisions of Scottish and UK government, because they've decided year on year to reduce our resourcing and thus our capability. I agree with our ALBA colleagues, as will many, if not all of us, that more needs to be done to support our poorest and most vulnerable. But We need proper resource and stability from the Scottish Government. I desperately want to see our area prosper and flourish, with poverty eradicated and everyone having a role to play in our society. I don't feel like we've had enough freedom or capability across the past 5 years to make this a reality, unfortunately. We want to do more, and this can be seen by the things that we've laid out in this and previous budgets. So I would ask that we keep putting pressure on government to give us a better settlement in light of this. In the papers, we've had to cut things like food waste collections. A local nursery has lost its hours in addition to previous losses across the year of things like glass recycling, free swimming and community centres. We've also had lines added to our budget that we couldn't have imagined 5 years ago, like PPE and COVID-19 being mentioned now. And looking back, we're so lucky that we had those reserves to see us through that time. And that's why I can't endorse the use of the reserves as suggested by Alba. We've had our professional guidance on this. Our advice has been to have a prudent approach to this, and in the past this has worked well for us. It's disappointing that we've had some of our members break away from the members' budget working group, since consensus has been key over the years, which we've heard from other colleagues in balancing our budgets. But they stayed for the most part of the process, and for that, a thank you is needed. A thank you is needed for all the other members of the members' budget working group, the trade unions that have given us their red lines and their opinions, for all officers, including our corporate directors and financial experts. Thank you to everybody who, not only this year, but every other year, has continually helped create the budgets that we've had to make and helped us to make cuts in the most prudent way possible. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for letting me speak, Provost.
Thanks again very much, Natasha. Natasha, of course, expressed gratitude to all the officers concerned.
Provost, sorry to interrupt, but Graham represents the Tory group and I represent the Labour group, and neither of us have got a chance to say how well done it's been today. So I think Graham, because it was David Wilson who'd be shouting and bawling that you're wasting time, and he'd like to go on. So if you don't mind,
I'm sorry, no, Channel.
I know what like it is sitting there, your ears are everywhere.
No, it's a matter of, I am calling people in the sequence which appears in the chat facility. If your name is in...
Earlier on, you said you were going through all the leaders first, and you got to Ronnie was the last one, and Graham was sitting.
Actually, I didn't say I was going to call all the leaders first. Councillor MacLeod said, sorry, Channel, when I'm speaking. Councillor MacLeod said that I hadn't called all the leaders, so I did call people, but in the same sequence as they appeared in the chat function. Not, but if you're in the chat function, or if you want to make a contribution, Channel, I'll certainly call on you. But the next person to speak is Tommy.
Yes, thank you, Provost. And again, I'll echo the comments regarding the effort made by officers to bring this budget together. But I'm supporting the budget from the 5 groups today, Provost, because it is fiscally responsible, first and foremost. It's a sensible use of the resources we do have currently, and probably most importantly, it takes cognizance of the financial challenges which the council are going to face in the next few years. But I'm disappointed in the Alba budget because they don't address the £500,000 increase in the budget deficit over the next 2 to 3 years and how we're going to address that. They appear to have disregarded the Mr. Puck's view on the use of reserves of a maximum of 4 million. And Councillor McElhenney Jim talks about poverty and heating and eating, yet his budget means wants us to take another, I think, 6 jobs to balance his budget. So I think it's a bit rich to say you can you've got a choice to eat and heat, yet you're quite happy to let people go, and that's not something I would support. And in addition, and finally, Provost, on the council tax, we should remember that the council tax increase that we are putting up here today, that will protect jobs and services, not just for this budget, but for future budgets, because it's baselined. So we should remember that as well. But I'm supportive of the budget moved by Councillor McCabe, Provost. Thank you.
Thanks, Tommy. Channel.
Thanks, Provost. No, I'm sorry, it was just a misunderstanding when Jim said and the leaders, and I thought you'd get through it, because I've actually got a note here, but I didn't put it in because it's comment, and that was it. Well, first of all, I'd like to start, Provost, by saying thanks to you, because I know this is your last term, I know it's Jerry's last term and mine, and I'd like to say thanks for everything you've done. And you're right when you say popularity. I have never met a school person of different ages who didn't think you were Mr. Wonderful. Seriously, and you had something that some teachers don't seem to have. You had charisma that children understood, and that was a good thing, and you've got it there now. And to all the officers, I've seen, well, I've had quite a few budgets. I'd like to say thanks. Alan Pucker and his team have been absolutely brilliant through the years, when I don't know how his hair's no grey like ours, Provost, because some of the times he was coming out and looking, and he was picking figures out of the sky, I'll say, but 9 times out of 10, he was near enough spot on. I don't know if he had inside information or Mystic Meg done this for him, but he was good, and he was good at telling you. And it might not be what you like or I liked, and we all have something different, and that's everybody. We've got a wee pet thing here, or whatever it is our pet hobby is, and we think about it. And there's people out there that would come under that bracket. So from that point of view, I'd like to say a big thank you to them and all the staff and everyone else. To the members working group, I can go back when, as they said earlier on, it was awful when they could turn around, instead of sitting around a table, they had the officers, and by the way, at that time you had Alan, and you had all the different officers you had to deal with, and they would go into your groups, and every group had one. So at that time you had 3 groups, and that was bad enough. And then you'd have them 2 or 3 times, and they were there late at night dealing with that, when it was much easier to, in common sense, to get round a table and have that little bit understanding. There's how much we've got. How can we make it better for Inverclyde and the people in it? And that's been working the members working group. Unfortunately, Jim at the last minute felt he couldn't be in there. I'd like to have seen him staying in there, putting his case forward. Whether we liked it or not, at least it was there, and then we could have all decided what we're going to do that time. That didn't work out, but I hope that he goes back into the working group. To whoever's lucky enough to go back in to represent Inverclyde, remember, it's the one thing I'll say, you're in there for Inverclyde, and you're in there for working for Inverclyde, and that's from the youngest to the oldest who lives here, and you make it better. And it's a pleasure to try it. You don't always succeed, but please, please remember that. You might be in a political party, they're in Edinburgh or Westminster, we're in Inverclyde. So the most important thing is remember the folk there. Your other persuasions is another argument. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. I can only say this budget here is, I think it's absolutely tremendous when you think what we came through, how we've managed to use reserves of £4 million and have put it up to 1.95, call it 2% for easy talking's sake. If everybody else had done the same as us, just think how much better off we'd be and everyone else. And it's the first time that Chris mentioned the price of fuel. It's the first time I've seen leaded petrol and diesel at the same price in Inverclyde at 1.4 pence a litre. That tells me something, because everywhere else there's a big difference. But anyway, our budget, I think, was tremendous, and I'm not going to get into outside stuff. I think the way forward, you've got money back, you've not got an empty treasure chest where we note saying, thanks for the memories, and I've spent the money, and that's it. And that means that the new council, whoever they are, will have something to go on. I'd also like to thank Stephen here, because he'd been under a lot of pressure with various things, and not everybody agreed with him. I didn't always agree with him. We probably had more arguments than enough, or slight difference of opinion, but he managed to hold it together and hold all the different views together and come up with solutions. And some of them, I suppose, he didn't like to 100%, but he got them and he got round. And I'm glad that today we're sitting with 2 options, yes. And as I said, we'll decide what option we're going for. But what he's brought in a budget, I think, has been absolutely brilliant when we think of all the things that we've done. And the point is how many jobs we're not losing. We're actually keeping the services that we can go. So for all these things, well done to the committees, well done to all the committees, and well done to members working group. And please, please, after this, when it goes back and whoever's re-elected, please remember and work for that and work for Inverclyde. Thanks.
Thanks, Chano, and I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. And thank you for the very kind words. I intend to put them on the back of the T-shirt.
Right.
Know,
Provost, it's an age thing with the misunderstanding, so don't worry about it.
Right. Graham, do you want to speak as interim leader of the Conservative Party?
Thank you very much, Provost. No, I will not make a contribution, but I will support the motion before us.
Now, Stephen, as a proposer of the motion, has 5 minutes to sum up. Stephen.
Okay, thanks very much, Provost. I think it's been quite a respectful debate, so I'm not going to get into sort of any knockabout, and I don't think, given the events that are unfolding and the other side of Europe, that it's sensible to get into knockabout politics even this close to an election. But I want to respond to a few points. I do admire Jim's passion in arguing the case for a council tax freeze, but actually I've consistently argued a council tax freeze is regressive when it comes to supporting people in low incomes who don't benefit from a council tax freeze. And in terms of arguing for funding, COSLA didn't argue for a one-off 120 million. COSLA argued for 371 million. And in terms of practical politics, might have been less disappointed if we got 120 million, but on a recurring basis. 121 off only postpones tough decisions. And I have to say, Jim, I've been fighting for 15 years to get a better deal for local government. So I really won't take any lessons from anybody about making that argument. I mean, in terms of the Alba proposals, the crux is obviously a council tax freeze, which really essentially would only benefit people in band E to H. And I have to remind Christopher that they actually can qualify for council tax reduction, because depending on your income, and there are people in Inverclyde who live in these bands who do get council tax reduction and won't pay any more through an increase in council tax. But Alba haven't highlighted how they're intending to fund the council tax freeze. They're intending to cut community and youth work services and adult literacy services, which benefit the least affluent areas in our community and the least affluent people. They're proposing a 53% cut to the opening hours of Kilmacombe Library. I'm not sure what they've got against Kilmacombe, why they're singling out Kilmacombe Library for cuts. And I have to say, I'm sure that people who live in higher banded properties in Kilmacombe and elsewhere, and I certainly know I'm prepared to pay a modest amount more in council tax to protect our adult literacies and community work services and our library as well. They're also proposing to use an extra £568,000 of reserves, and we've obviously had various comments in terms of whether that's responsible or not. I note in terms of the £500 payment, they've cut that back to £350 payment because the Scottish Government have come up with £150. And we've certainly, in our discussions after Alba left us, have found extra money, obviously identified extra money to increase the payment to £300. And obviously there'll be that other £150. But given the information that Mr Puckrin has relayed today about the last minute further £80 million offered from the Scottish Government to potentially support businesses and local households, I would hope that we get a share of that funding and we can use some of that potentially to increase the payment to low-income households beyond £300. I think it's actually worth reflecting on the fact, since the original draft budget was announced by the Scottish Government, they've now given local government one-off funding of nearly £500 million, £120 million, then £280 million for the council tax rebate, and now another £80 million. They're clearly awash with cash that they're trying to get out the door before the end of the financial year. But one or two other comments, Provost, I have to say, in the Alba budget, and people might have noticed that there's a proposal for a play area in Jim's ward, a proposal for £100,000 for lighting the Mountain Glen in Jim's ward. There's a proposal for another traffic study in Gourock in Chris's ward. And according to the Green Telegraph, there's actually a proposal to have a play park in Gourock as well, which will be news because it's not actually in the Alba proposal that there is a play park in Gourock. There's a provision in both in the Alba proposal and the other proposal, £100,000 contribution towards the play strategy, but there's no specific recommendation as to which play area it will be. So there isn't really that much to choose between the two proposals, Provost. It's 99% similar, but there are important differences, and I hope that the majority of members will support the motion that I've moved today.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I think the motion has been widely ventilated, and it was a very civilised debate. Now we'll proceed to a vote. Now, there is no chance of a unanimous vote. So, Ian, could you advise me, will we take a roll call vote?
Yes, Provost, we would move to the roll call vote, which I'm happy to deal with.
Provost, could I raise a point of order, please, before we go to the vote?
Right.
Okay, I've been harangued in the chat more than once today about timekeeping, and it is a bit distracting, I have to say, when you're speaking and there's comments in the chat. I'm not aware that I went over my 5 minutes summing up.
No, you didn't.
If somebody wants to advise me that I did go over my 5 minutes, I will profusely apologise. And if somebody wants to advise me I went over my 15 minutes when I made the introduction, I'll profusely apologise. So if somebody's got evidence that I went over my time, then please provide it.
I'll just say that on both occasions, you stayed within the allotted time span.
Thank you, Provost.
Okay, Ian, could you proceed to a vote?
Thank you, Provost. Absolutely. So, councillors, we've got the motion by Councillor McCabe and then the amendment by Councillor McElhenney. So I'll just do a roll call vote. Pardon me. Councillor Altfeld.
Motion.
Provost Brennan.
Motion.
Councillor Brooks.
Motion.
Councillor Clougherty.
Motion.
Councillor Crowther.
Motion.
Councillor Curley.
Motion.
Councillor Dorian.
Motion.
Councillor Jackson.
Motion.
Councillor MacLeod.
Motion.
Councillor McCabe.
Motion.
Councillor McCormick.
Motion.
Councillor C. McElhenney.
Amendment.
Councillor J. McElhenney.
Amendment.
Councillor Maguire.
Motion, please.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Motion.
Councillor McVeigh.
Motion.
Councillor Moran.
Motion.
Councillor Nelson.
Motion.
Councillor Quinn.
Motion.
Councillor Rebecca.
Motion.
And Councillor Robertson.
Motion.
The motion is carried 19 votes to 2. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much, Ian, and thanks very much to all the members who participated today. I'm going to devise a T-shirt for every one of you, and emblazon it with who you, I'm going to describe you in terms of who you're more popular than. Okay. Good night and thank you.